policy an attempt to sidestep those mandates, to enhance them, to get to the end ahead of time? What do you think?
Well, no, there is a real ID statute that at this point in time doesn't have perfect clarity attached to it because the regs that will actually define what that real ID driver's license must, what thresholds it must satisfy, those regs have not been promulgated with any finality. So we do not know what real ID in fact will be. 7 states have opted out of real ID, saying it is a choice the state is entitled to make, saying that the cost and the incremental security that is alleged to result from real ID, in their view, is not worth it. I do not anticipate that New York will opt out. Just the contrary. I anticipate that we will do what needs to be done to comply with real ID and the statute once we understand what that means, but we don't know yet what that means. There may be, in fact, there is a fair presumption that people in many states will have a 2-tiered structure where there will be a license that will satisfy real ID that people can acquire should they wish to do so and perhaps absorb a slight incremental cost, and another driver's license that would be a state license that people could acquire at the state level. But that is something that needs to be determined. We'll just have to wait and see. These are uncertainties. This is by no means, of course, an effort to sidestep. Real ID will gain meaning as we move forward.
In terms of the national agenda, following from that question, you have positioned yourself as a governor who's looking out for national policies as well as state policies. Is this one of those policies? And if so, how do you see the step after New York takes this policy?
Well, I begin with a kind question, I suppose. I begin with focusing on what my job, which is to protect New York. And I don't view my responsibilities going beyond that. Sometimes we succeed and sometimes we don't, but it has an implication with respect to federal policy. It would have been wonderful to see Congress override the president's veto on estrogen, for instance. There was an example of a policy emanating from Washington that, or a presidential veto that we believed was not in accord with what we certainly are pushing as a state policy in terms of health care for our children. I think that there is consensus emerging at the state level that the federal failure to deal with immigration has put those of us who are governors into an impossible position. This, in fact, is a reality that we see in policy context after policy context. It may be education, where No Child Left Behind was a shell of a statute and had no real meaning. It was a mandate without any funding to elevate standards. It is the case in terms of immigration policy, as we have seen in this instance, where we have in the distant future, or not so distant future, a real ID statute that we will be asked to comply with that will have enormous cost, and it is the case as well with healthcare. So I think that the governors, and we do talk, will try to find a way that we can resolve these thorny issues if there continues to be a vacuum in Washington.
I want to ask sort of a personal question about this policy. Because given your law enforcement background, I canvassed your, unbeknownst to you, your Homeland Security transition team, and most of them, particularly people that have been involved in national security at the highest level, support this policy, not just Richard Clark. And so it led me to the question, for those of us who keep hearing about homegrown terrorism and terrorism in our midst, do you have any stories or any thoughts about how exactly this will affect our ability to prosecute terrorism? And is there some way in which your own personal background led to this, or is this strictly?
Well, look, let me answer this right. I think I'll come at it from this perspective. I've spent most of my legal career in law enforcement as Attorney General, 6 years as a prosecutor in the Manhattan DA's office, dealing with an array of cases, everything from traditional street crime to organized crime, political corruption, etc. I believe that when we can legitimately gain access to information, it helps us as prosecutors and it helps maintain order. There has been, of course, a significant debate in Washington about how one legitimately gains access to information. I'm glad Jerry Nadler is here. As I said, alluded to in my introduction, he has been stalwart in maintaining those constitutional boundaries that are so essential, and we thank him for that. But my belief as a state prosecutor is that we do better to know more legitimately, to know more based upon the consent of those who are here in our community, that we know more and can therefore gain access to databases. The NYPD, the state police, are among the most effective law enforcement agencies in the world. Why? They have access to information. It is not only what they call, boots on the street, but the capacity to tap into databases that are legitimately based upon real information. I just saw Mike Balboni, who's the Director of Homeland Security here. I want to thank him. He has been so instrumental in helping us on these tough issues. These are the thorny issues, and yes, my background as a prosecutor is what leads me to this, but also from another perspective. My background as a citizen of a state that is an immigrant state. And we should not forget that as well. My focus in generating this policy is security. But it is also a reality that we should never forget that we are a state that benefits and derives its very excitement, ingenuity, and dynamism from the fact that we are the port of entry of choice, I would argue and hope, for every ethnicity and nationality in the world. And that is what makes us different.
Okay, I'm going to take a couple of questions from the floor. Professor Skolman.
Yeah, Governor, you made a very persuasive argument.